Learning jargon. In any domain you go into, you've got to learn the jargon. And the first jargon that you're probably going to already be familiar with is folk and slang jargon. It's going to be superficial, fuzzy categories, words that describe a lot of different things. Think about the taxonomy of animals and the Latin names that there are for each animal and each plant. Those exist so that specialists can distinguish things that to most people seem exactly the same or very similar, or you just don't have any word for it. So these fuzzy categories, these superficial types of languages or subsets of languages are used by people who just aren't experts in that area. Another thing in terms of superficiality is, are you using language that describes a problem or a situation or a thing or a person at a deep level, at a structural level, or are you describing it in terms of what's going on the surface? So somebody who's a beginner or a novice is going to be looking at something at the superficial level and grouping things based on, well, how are they superficially similar? An expert is going to look at, well, how are these really at the root level the same, and how do I structure it based off of that? Showing public knowledge, so cultural prejudices, history. These things are all wrapped up and intertwined with the jargon that people use, folk and slang jargon. So there's going to be prejudices, there's going to be sometimes pejorative swear words that are associated with a specific domain of knowledge, and it shows what a society generally, or what a group of people generally thinks about that domain of knowledge or that domain of expertise. And this often has a connection with public-facing jargon. So now we're getting more into the business world, but it relates to any business or any organization or any person that has a public face that's important to maintain. And what that means is, for example, when you're seeing advertisements on TV, newspaper, radio, etc., the language that they're using is generally going to reflect what the customer needs. So the language is going to reflect also what's politically correct. It's going to try to hide or obfuscate anything that shows that there's a difference between what the company's wants, which is to get the customer's money and to make more money and to charge more money and make more profits, versus the interest of the customer, which is to get what they want at the cheapest possible price. So those kind of things are going to be hidden, and language is going to be used to do that. Related to customer needs also is the values and the metrics that customers use. So whatever the customers care about, that's going to be embedded in the language that's public facing, that jargon. But there's other types of jargon, internal jargon. This internal jargon is going to reflect what's going on inside the organization. And because there's different levels inside the organization, there's going to be different types of jargon even within internal. So people at the bottom of the totem pole are going to be having a different jargon from the people that are in the executive suite. There's a different type of jargon because there's different things they're talking about, and there's different levels of understanding. The people in the C-suite don't understand what's going on in the day-to-day in the trenches as much. Those people in the trenches don't understand what's the 5-year, 10-year vision, what is the strategic things, how are we competing against other people in our industry, stuff like that. So there's obviously overlap in both of those areas, but the things that they're focusing on, thinking about problems that they're solving, areas of expertise are different. That's going to be reflected in the jargon. There's also going to be conflict between those levels. So people wanting to rise up in the ranks, not liking what their boss says, stuff like that, what they have to do every day. And so jargon is going to be generated based on describing those things. At the same level, people at the top are going to be like, oh, those people at the bottom aren't doing things. They're always, this or that. So they're going to be complaining, and people at every level, people in the middle are going to be complaining about people at the bottom and the top. Everybody's going to have complaints one way or another, and that's going to be encoded in a special language. Usually there's going to be a deeper level of categorization. So people inside an organization are going to understand an area more deeply than their customers usually. There's even going to be different customers oftentimes. So if you look at a beer company, they're selling beer during the Super Bowl, but they're also selling beer to convenience stores. So if you're part of the convenience store industry, you're going to be seeing ads where it's like, well, our new box of beer has this new attractive design and it's been shown to boost sales by 15%. The ads going to the convenience store owners aren't going to be about what the end user wants in terms of great taste, great experience, as much as it's going to be about, well, how can this make me money as a convenience store owner? So that's an important distinction to make, and you're just going to see that once you start getting involved in the more internal communications in a domain, in a subject matter, in an industry. And the jargon's also going to reflect the business processes, frameworks. So that all ties in with the deeper level of organization, but also how that organization as a whole is set up. Then you're going to have scientific academic jargon. So there's going to be competing theories. Each theory is going to use different language, and oftentimes a new theory comes with a new vocabulary in tow. So there isn't just going to be one new vocabulary, but for each major subdiscipline, for the theories within each subdiscipline, there's going to be new vocabulary, and you're going to have to use new vocabulary in order to keep up with the new innovations. Oftentimes, to come up with this new vocabulary, they have to combine two words, they have to go into the Latin and Greek, or they have to use common words that have a very general meaning to the public, but have a very specific meaning in that specific area, that specific domain of knowledge. So you have to be aware of that, make sure you don't get confused. And the reason why all this stuff is important is because you need to be able to search effectively. And the people in these different groups are going to be using a different language. So you have to know the language before you can search and have Google or whatever website or search engine you're using give back to you what you're looking for from the group of people that you want to learn from. And this list right here gives you an idea of the reference books that are out there: glossary, encyclopedia, dictionary, handbook, introduction, textbook type thing. But oftentimes you're going to miss some of this jargon where it's mostly orally transmitted and it's not written down as much, or you would find it in internal emails people are sending to each other, or IM messages or text messages people are sending back and forth. You're not going to find it published anywhere where you can get access to it. So it's often pretty difficult to get a good read on it. Other times the community intentionally uses obscure words or acronyms in order to keep people that are outsiders from being able to understand what they're talking about. So you think about, well, what kind of community would want to use a coding system? So if they have a reason, and you'll know based on what subject matter you're learning if this is going to apply to you, but is this something where there's aspects that are politically incorrect that people don't want to talk about? And so if there's if there's an area where it could be politically incorrect and people want to have themselves associated with it, talking about a certain idea or making a certain argument, in that area, a new language is going to evolve so that those people can hide and obscure what they're doing from the general public, but people that are in the know what they're talking about. So, I mean, this goes all the way to people coming up with stories that represent their political arguments or their fictional stories. So different levels of code. So it might not just be the language, but it could be also the ideas themselves are encoded. So there's a lot of different levels this goes to. You just need to be aware of the language that's being used, because that's going to help you find the deep knowledge that you're looking for.